Soccerex Connected, day one. Ben Jacobs, a very good afternoon or good morning, of course, if you're in North and South America. Good evening if you're watching us in Asia. And we are very much global. Over 2,000 delegates have signed up, and we'll move on to our 2 o'clock panel in just a moment. A few bits of housekeeping, though. First of all, please do engage with us. Use that hashtag Soccerex Connected at Soccerex on Twitter. And to give you added incentive, we've got a great giveaway because day one is presented by the Johan Cruyff Institute, and Cruyff had basically a ton of really cool nicknames, including the Saviour. So what I want from you is either your nickname or alternatively your favourite football nickname, and you can tweet me at JacobsBen. You can tweet us at SoccerX as well. Make sure you use the hashtag Soccerex Connected, and at the end of the day, or possibly first thing tomorrow morning, we'll announce the winner on social media. Loads of shirts that you can pick from: Edwin van der Sar, Manchester United; Louis Saha, Laurie Lindsay, US Women's National Team; Deco, Carlos Alberto, and many, many more. Follow us on social if you want to see the picture of all of the signed shirts that are available. In terms of those of you who have already got in touch with us, Matt Evans, you're definitely a contender. He's tweeted me and said his favorite nickname is One Size Fits All. One size fits all. Keep saying it if you don't understand. That's a very clever one. Thank you very much indeed for getting in contact. Fabiel also says, I quite like El Pistolero for Luis Suarez. He's doing really well, isn't he, at the moment at Atletico Madrid? And that means the gunman. And he does definitely shoot and score, says Fabiel. So do get in contact with me if you've got any nicknames for your chance to win that signed shirt on day one. And we'll be doing this with a different question every single day throughout the week. And in addition, remember that Soccerex Connected is all about networking and staying connected. So make sure that you engage and set up private meetings, but also have a look at the exhibitors on show via the app. And if you want to see the full schedule, that's on the app as well, alongside our website too. So a very good afternoon or good morning to you. It's great to have your company. We hope you're well and healthy and surviving the pandemic on both a business and personal level. And next, we move on to our panel for 2 o'clock GMT entitled Developing the World Game with or Without European Aid. And this panel focuses on how smaller nations can grow their leagues and keep their talent from moving to Europe's elite leagues. We'll discuss whether football is maybe becoming a bit too Euro-focused and how other regions, clubs, leagues and federations can try to keep pace. To discuss this, we are delighted to welcome Ricardo Leo de Andrada, a scientific consultant at the Brazilian Football Confederation. Alongside him, we have Hisham El Amrani, the CEO of Here Sports, and completing the panel, a very familiar face, the former Wigan and Blackburn forward Jason Roberts, who is now Director of Development at CONCACAF. And our moderator is Steve Blues, the Managing Editor of Goal Africa. Steve, a very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon and welcome to the panel, everybody. We've got quite a selection of experts here with us. So without much further ado, I'm going to ask Jason on his just a short introduction on himself and his initial views on the topic.
Thank you, Steve. First of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. It's a pleasure to be with you here. My name is Jason Roberts. Really nice introduction from everybody. I am the Director of Development for CONCACAF. My agenda really stretched across coaching, education, women's football, where we have our head of women's football, Karina LeBlanc, professionalization of football with club licensing, and as well as that, corporate social responsibility, which also encompasses the Football for Social Change agenda. Steve, I think if I'm going to give a very brief introduction to my role about and my views about developing the game with or without European aid, I think it's all about the sustainability of that. I think we can all agree that we're in a very dynamic, rapidly changing global market, and the strategy will continue to adapt. We have seen more investment in player acquisitions at a younger age, and that also brings some challenges. But as an ex-player, I can assure you that I believe that the best will always find a way to unlock their earning capacity and to play in the biggest competitions. And I don't think there's any specific loyalty to Europe or any other competition. It's really about unlocking that opportunity and playing at the highest level that you feel that you can as a player. So I think we need to accept that it is a global game and that there's room for professional football to grow and thrive. If we're talking about where I currently am in CONCACAF and our 41 different member associations, and for the talent in the region to play in Europe and the more mature markets. And it doesn't necessarily have to be either or. I think we have to think about the challenge that is that area of chance. Can we ensure that it is a meritocracy, that the opportunity is level across the board so the best can really unlock their earning potential if we accept that it is a global game? So in my view, very briefly, it's not necessarily about where that opportunity is unlocked. It's how do we improve the game for the many as opposed to the few.
Thank you, Jason. Ricardo, would you like to introduce yourself and give us a brief overview of your ideas on the topic?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Steve, and hello, everyone. My name is Ricardo, and I started my career as a football coach here in Brazil, but then moved to management and had the opportunity to work in the local organizing committees of all these mega events that Brazil has hosted across the past decade. After completing my last formation, the FIFA Master, I'm back to Brazil and have been working as a professor, have been working also as a match delegate for CONMEBOL at Copa Libertadores and Sudamericana Next, and have been assisting the Brazilian Football Federation Association in several projects related to football development. So yeah, I'm glad to talk about this topic. I think here in Brazil we have several issues concerning, the development of the Brazilian league and a long-term strategy that might turn possible for holding our most promising players in the Brazilian market. I think funneling to the European market, it has been especially sustainable for the Brazilian clubs because it's helping them to pay the debt, to reduce the debt, to restructure their finance. But on the other hand, they are not seeing a technical return on the pitch. So selling the players at a very early stage, because that's what's happening right now, is impacting the quality of Brazilian football, the quality of the game of the Brazilian league. But it might be, a necessary step. And once we have the financial fair play in place, once the clubs are more structured, I hope they won't need to sell these players, and maybe within a few years, taking into account, the quality and the infrastructure and all the qualified coaching staff and the quality of Brazilian youth competitions, I think in the future it might be possible for Brazilian clubs to hold these talents and to increase the level, to increase the attractiveness of the Brazilian league at professional level.
Thanks, Ricardo. I've just seen Hisham, has he dropped off? Yeah, it looks like it. Okay, then we will see when he comes back online. But for the meantime, obviously I coming at this from a slightly different perspective, as a member of the media. Oh, hi, Hisham. We lost you for a second there. Do you want to just give yourself a brief introduction and your views on the topic, your initial views?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Steve, for that. Apologies for the disconnection. Hisham El Amrani, being from Morocco and having worked in football for the last 20 years, had the pleasure to be a marketing manager for the Asian Football Confederation, but also Secretary General of CAF for 8 years in Africa. and then also CEO of the World Cup bid that Morocco undertook for the 2026 World Cup. Very glad to be discussing this topic today, and to answer the question shortly, how sustainable is the relationship about funneling talent into Europe? I think this relationship will always be sustainable, but it's just how to further improve it and how to make it more mutually beneficial for both continents. There's, like Jason said, there's enough talent across the continent to maintain some of that talent home and to send across talent across Europe but also Asia and other places across the world. But it's a matter of how you make better governance across the federations and the clubs, but also how to make your local football more appealing and use it as a product, how to make it sustainable in terms of broadcast, in terms of being financially independent, so that you can keep those players that want to have their livelihood in Africa, and also maintaining the relationship open with other clubs across Europe and across the world in general.
Thank you, Hicham. Sorry, as I was saying during your cut, I come at this from a slightly different perspective. And of course, I'm representing the media here. Our coverage, particularly in Africa, is built around the star power of the African players within the major European leagues. We have a very strong audience affinity and reaction to their performances, how they get on. However, when we look at the movement of players within Africa as well, you can see the players gravitating towards the richer leagues. Sort of about 18 months, maybe 2 years ago, for example, the Kenyan League lost its sponsorship and its broadcast deal in one fell swoop. And you saw a number of the sort of star players in the Kenyan League then move to the Tanzanian League, the country next door. When the Kenyan FKF was able to kind of reinstate a sponsor, reinstate broadcast deals, you saw that talent flow back into the Kenyan League. I suppose my question is that will players and talent always just follow the money, or will there be other priorities that come into play?
Steve, I think an important line to draw here is, of course, for these players, it is a job. And this is a way to provide for your family. This is a way for you to, in many cases, get yourself out of a difficult situation, depending on the socioeconomic class that you come from. And myself, my own trajectory into football is somewhat similar, having been brought up in what was considered a very tough neighborhood. Football was one of the realistic opportunities I felt that I had to get myself into a better situation financially, of course, and for your family. So this is central to this discussion, that we understand that this is a job and this is a chance for these players to unlock that economic potential. In regards to it being a star-driven game, I think it's not an either or. I think both things can be true. And it's actually down to the strategy of the member association, of the region, of the confederation. And of course, there is an element of seeing your best players on the highest stage. It is transformative. If you look in our region, a Keylor Navas or Alphonso Davies or Pulisic or Weston McKennie or Leon Bailey, of course, you're going to see that and believe that there's an opportunity for you also to achieve something. But I think that there's a wider point about how do we create a more equitable system of development, and what role do the clubs play? What role do the leagues play? What role do the member associations or the confederation or the football family play? And I think that is where there's some value in this proposition and what we're discussing today. From a CONCACAF perspective, and you mentioned some of the issues in Kenya, some of these situations globally can cause a real issue. We have a diverse region, from amateur football in some of our highest ranked MAs to powerhouse leagues like the MLS and Liga MX, and of course in Canada, the new CPL, which is providing new pathways for young Canadian players. But what many people may not know is that we have very strong leagues in Central America, Costa Rica, Honduras. They have very strong clubs and very strong leagues. Of course, we supplement that at the CONCACAF level, alongside the investment of MAs and the wider football family. So I think the ecosystem is greatly improving, which will mean that, to Hisham's point, there is enough, and it is sustainable enough for the talent who can utilize and make more money for themselves and their family are going to navigate there. But what I'm really interested in is creating a system that gives more players the opportunity to earn a living doing what they love, more coaches an opportunity to earn a living doing what they love, more administrators. So whether that's developing new leagues, from our perspective at CONCACAF, we developed new leagues since Victor Montagliani has come on board as our president, whether it's the CONCACAF League, whether it's the Champions League that's been supplemented. We're the only confederation with a U15 tournament. And all of these things are to increase the scope and to ensure there's more football for everybody.
If I can intervene, Steve, here.
Please.
Yes, no, following what Jason has just said, I think at the end of the day, what is important is that for African players, Europe will always be the prime spot to go. It's the key magnet because obviously reflecting not only the economic situation, but also top football is being played there as per the historical data and so on. But I think there's a lot of homework to be done back home. And back to your point about the Tanzanian and Kenyan league, you need to provide visibility to your product, to your championship, to your local league. You need to give it, to package it in a way that visibility is not enough. What you need to show needs to be good enough. So that means proper governance, whether the league is independent or whether it's strong, whether you can be financially viable to make it sustainable, whether you have a certain grassroots development that is being put in place, but also basic things like scheduling. Some championships right now in Africa are still not being played, and that was even before the COVID struck. So you need to be very stringent in terms of how much professionalism is there. And I think one good way to do that is to follow up all the requirements of the club licensing that CAF has implemented, that needs to be followed more in a more stringent way. And just to give you some figures, of course, there's a lot of talent coming out of Africa going to Europe, but most of the transfers in 2020 happen across Africa. More than 900 transfers took place this year, despite the COVID, but for only about $6 million worth of value, whereas about 600 players went to Europe, but for a value about 6 or 7 times that amount that was mentioned before. So there's more than 17,000 players across the continent that are deemed professional. So there's space for those that need to stay on the continent and those that can trade their talent, whether in Europe or in Asia for that matter, because more and more African players today are going to the Middle East or China or other emerging markets where the league is getting stronger and stronger.
Yeah, thank you. One of the, I'm talking obviously from an African's perspective, one of the things that sort of personally annoys me, if I can put it that way, is Africa losing talent that should be funneled into its national teams and being kind of taken at an early age into various academy setups in Europe, and then declaring for that country. A recent example, of course, Ansu Fati. Ricardo, I mean, in Brazil, you know, I'm struggling to think of too many incidents where young Brazilian players have left the country and then declared for, you know, other national teams. You know, what is Brazil doing differently that Africa could perhaps replicate in terms of retaining that young talent going into European academies within its national team setups?
Well, I think there is a big difference in terms of the size of the market. So Brazilian football is so much bigger if we think in the dimension of the country and in the size of the football community and the culture and so on, that whenever this happens, it doesn't make so much difference for the Brazilian football, because there are so many players that will come and will have the opportunity to play for the Brazilian teams, that you know, that's not a huge problem for the Brazilian football right now. But you know, I agree with Hisham when he says that there is a lot of homework to be done, and I think maybe for the Brazilian football community, the secret will be to create a more stable environment for the professional clubs. You know, there is a common understanding in the international market that sometimes the Brazilian football environment deform the players. There's so much instability with coaches, with technical directors being changed all the time, that and this hampers the development of the players at the very final stage. And because of this, the interest for more experienced players has decreased substantially. So if we look at the player pathway, and if we look at, for instance, Neymar was sold to Barcelona at the age of 21, 10 years ago approximately. This was probably the last case. And if we look at the most recent transactions, we can check that not a single top player older than 21 was sold to European clubs. So we can see that in Vinicius Junior, in Renier, in Rodrigo. So what's happening right now is that top European clubs are taking more risks they didn't used to take, and they are searching for players and signing them at a very earlier stage. So Fluminense has just refused a big offer for Patrick, a promising player from the under-17 team. And there is a player in Palmeiras, Hendrick, who is only 14, and he might receive an offer even before he signs his first professional contract with the club. So Brazilian football is now facing this problem, and the Brazilian league as a result, because no one is asking anymore who are the best players of the Brazilian league. They are asking who will be the next Vinicius Junior. So I think there is much to be done in terms of a good financial fair play system, which includes technical fair play elements that will maybe enable Brazilian coaches, Brazilian technical directors to work in the long term in a more safe, in a more stable environment, and with Brazilian clubs paying their debts, going through a restructuring process, we might see, you know, a different management model that will enable these talents to stay in the country and to strengthen the leagues and the appeal of the league at international level.
Thanks, Ricardo. Jason, you mentioned earlier that you had some development tournaments at the under-15 level, I think you said. With those tournaments, you know, what is the process then to kind of keep that talent within the CONCACAF pool rather than, you know, breakout players ending up moving to Europe, being in the academies and perhaps declaring for the Spanish national team or the English national team rather than the CONCACAF country of their birth?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I think Ricardo made some really interesting points that I'd like to contribute to. In regards to our competition in 2016, when our President Victor Montagliani came into his presidency, I think he came in an agenda of competition driving development. Because without competition, there really is no football. And the U15 tournament, we're the only confederation in the world with a centralized U15 tournament. We created the CONCACAF Nations League. From club football, there was the CONCACAF League, the CONCACAF Caribbean Shield, a lot more opportunities to showcase this talent. Of course, the Nations League alongside UEFA, we're the only confederation that has that in place. And that's provided opportunities for countries like mine, Grenada, to have meaningful competition, as well as the opportunities to participate in the Gold Cup. So all of these opportunities are relevant to showcase the talent. And I think that's first and foremost important. Ricardo made some interesting points about coaching education. And we are currently drafting our first coaching convention and have developed our B license. So all of these things are to improve the ecosystem. But actually, we need to really be mindful of the new strategies that are being put in place to develop young talent globally, because the race is on, even in Europe. And I was born in London, 12, 11-year-old kids are being signed and put into these pathways. And we've seen globally the change. You look at the City Football Group and the global footprint that they're having in creating more pathways with clubs in Manchester, Melbourne, New York, Mumbai, Yokohama, Red Bull with Red Bull Leipzig, and Red Bull Brazil, which I only just recently found out about, a New York Red Bull. And of course, the Right to Dream Academy, which was, as you all know, was recently acquired for a lot of money from the Mansour Group. So when you look at the new pathways being developed, you recognize that it is going to shift, that we are finding this global opportunity, find new ways to exploit and find that talent. And the question of the nations keeping the stars at home, in my opinion, is really dependent upon the country in question. Is it feasible for Grenada to keep a young talent like myself who may have the opportunity to play in the Premier League? Possibly not. Then again, is it feasible for the MLS, who have invested in their MLS Next Academy system, and you're now seeing really strong players going into Europe, the likes of Weston McKennie and Zach Steffen, Alphonso Davies developed in Canada. So I think it always goes back to the interesting point that we've made, is that not all of the systems need to be doing the same thing at the same time. Europe has an important job to play in these more mature markets, but our smaller markets have a job to do as well. So I think that in closing, it's not just about keeping those players in-house or nationally, but it's about the capacity to allow those players to develop and the strategy behind that decision. Some of them need to go to develop and be able to play at the highest level that their ability allows them to, but we also need to make sure that there's a system to allow them to play at the highest level that they can, regionally and nationally. And for me, that's the real core of finding a real strategy behind allowing the best to monetize their ability, but also allowing everybody else to have a career within the game.
Thanks, Jason. Hicham, you were saying earlier about the difference in value between the sort of inter-Africa transfers and the amount of money that was then spent on players moving to Europe. Are there any kind of mechanisms for that money to flow into the African game itself, help support the leagues, help support the clubs, and so on?
Well, first of all, there's the training compensation that exists and that has been put in place by FIFA, allowing the clubs that train the players to get something out of the transfers for those players, whether across Europe or across Asia. But then again, it all comes back to how, if the country itself and the federation has a proper vision and planning ahead in terms of developing the players and the ones, whether not only the one representing the national team, but also the clubs in general. And one of the major issues, because you were talking about players within national teams, is that many federations in Africa keep focusing only on the key results of the A national team. And they are judged based on whether that national team performs at the latest tournament or not. Well, the whole pyramid is much more complicated than that. At the end of the day, Africa has a lot of entrepreneurship and companies that wants to invest into football and invest into sponsoring clubs and different entities, but they have to be shown a proper plan moving forward and how they can generate a return on investment, and how at the same time clubs needs to be included into the whole pyramid with the governing authorities in terms of the use of the infrastructure, in terms of different aspects like this, because ultimately you can have all the best wishes in terms of development, but if your pitch is not there, or your stadium is not even able to be operated properly, that's a major issue. But for example, given what the Confederation of African Football has done lately, CAF is the only confederation that created a national team tournament that is exclusively made for local-based players. It's called the African Nations Championship. That's a wonderful opportunity because it gives a platform to players that don't have the opportunity to play in Chelsea or Madrid or in Scotland, for example, but to play in their national league to showcase their talent at the national level. And you would wonder to see that there are hundreds of scouts that usually always attend those tournaments to pick the best players from there. But you cannot prevent the best ones to leave if the guy is going to be offered a salary that will be multiplied by 4 or 5, because everybody's looking for a home livelihood. I think what needs to be done further on the continent, on top of all those requirements, usually players, which for me are the raw materials, the backbone of football, they need to be more protected. Their rights are not always respected, and especially during COVID times, sometimes you wonder that clubs that are so-called professional are obliged to have even a professional contract, written contract in place. It's not even always the case. And so often they are left in the cold, and therefore, what do you expect from them except looking forward to go to Denmark or to Saudi Arabia or other places to deliver more? Of course, it's not the case everywhere, and Africa is a continent with 1 billion people, so there's a huge diversity of development. And you have clubs like Al Ahly or Kaizer Chiefs or Raja Casablanca that deliver proper governance models with their own ways of sourcing talent, of keeping talent through their academies, and exporting their best players abroad. But overall, there needs to be a very strong leadership at the confederation level. There needs to be an implementation of the club licensing that is being done across all the continents. But today, I think that CAF needs also to be able to start excluding clubs on a non-sporting ground, meaning that if they didn't fulfill certain criteria like having youth teams or women's football developed or proper administrators in place, that they shouldn't have the right to play the top competitions, and so on and so forth, so that ultimately the product can be improved and the players can be taken care of. Because once again, the whole objective, I believe, is that Africa keeps exporting its talents abroad, including Europe, but at the same time be in a position to keep a lot of them as well playing across the national championships.
Steve, would you mind if I just made a quick point on
Sure.
what Hisham just said? Absolutely agreed on the benefit and the importance of club licensing. Absolutely important. We have invested heavily in club licensing, and one of the benefits of having a lot more competitions, a lot more robust competition system in the CONCACAF region is all of those clubs are now beholden to our club licensing, and we've seen a big improvement in the areas which Hitcham has mentioned there, from youth teams, from women's football, certainly in coaching, because that is absolutely vital. Because without good coaches, we know that we're not going to get the raw assets, as Hisham has mentioned there, if we don't have access and opportunity for coaches to progress in their own country. And that was one of the challenges which we had in the CONCACAF region, which has led us to develop our B license, to work towards having a coaching convention with all of our member associations, which is absolutely vital. I just wanted to add a point about, can there be a more robust system in regards to the investment of the clubs in players and or the national environment? And I think that with the right strategy, there can clubs and leagues play more of a role than just the money that they pay for the player, and of course the player making his own life better. Can those resources be more equitably shared across the system, whether that's through leagues and other clubs? Is there a knowledge share? From a resource perspective, is there some sort of knowledge from leagues and clubs that can be shared? And I think that's something that can be built into some of the some of the strategies by emerging developing leagues into how they can improve themselves, and also how they can share some of those resources across the wider league rather than just one club and or one player?
Yeah, we find that very much in terms of the African leagues that we cover. You have normally two normal rival clubs who kind of dominate the supporters, financially, et cetera, and that's quite common basically across African leagues. Ricardo, earlier you were talking about the sort of strength of the league system in Brazil, but alluded to the need for changes. Would you like to elaborate a bit on some of the changes you think need implemented?
Yeah, sure. So when we look at the system currently in place in terms of youth development, the structures of the club, the academies, and the competitions calendar, this is not a concern for me right now. Over the past years, the Brazilian Confederation was able to create national tournaments, Brazilian national tournaments at under 17s, under 20s, Brazilian Cups, and so on. And these matches are being broadcasted to the whole world, to platforms such as MyCujo. So right now, I would say that Brazilian youth system is one of the best of the world, one of the most developed, maybe. It's the NBA of youth football, Of course, there are several improvements to be made, especially when it comes to women's football. But in terms of youth development in men's football, I think we have one of the best structure, one of the best systems in the world. But of course, Hisham was talking about earlier about the need for leadership. So of course, club licensing is very important. Club licensing has been in place in Brazil and has also helped the clubs to develop their youth structures and the initial women's football structures across the last years. But we need more sometimes, And when we look at the strategies that Brazilian clubs have put in place over the past years, we see that are very different models. For instance, when we look at Flamengo started a restructuring process a few years ago. Of course, the debt was much higher, much bigger than it is today. But what has been Flamengo's model in the past 2-3 years? To sell the most promising young talents, such as Vinicius Junior, such as Renier, such as Rodrigo, and they use part of this money, they receive it to sign, veteran players such as Felipe Luis, such as Diego Alves, such as Diego Ribas. So they are still only thinking in the financial return of selling these players. And for me, it's a clear example of maybe a lack of strategy and leadership.
It seems like we've lost
in the technical return the club could have with these young players.
Thank you, Ricardo. I've got a question in from the audience for Hicham, basically asking your opinion on whether it is positive or negative that academies like the Right to Dream are taking the responsibility away from clubs to actually develop talent.
They are not taking away responsibility from clubs. Clubs and academies like the Right to Dream are doing their job, and we need to have more academies like the Right to Dream, which is an example on the African continent, and I salute the work that they have been doing. Of course, clubs needs to do similar amount of work, but also federations or countries as a whole. I take, for example, the example of Morocco. that through a national vision established a national technical development center that is able to host every age category, women categories. They hired Australian coaches, they hired different professionals to come and help the development of Moroccan football. And lately, Morocco is defending champion at CHAN, and their clubs are participating in the finals or semifinals of the club competition. So there's a result that is being put out there. And academies needs to be just further developed, but taking into account more the African environment, not just opening up Paris Saint-Germain or AC Milan academies across the continent to just take out the best talent. But for me, an academy has an essential role to play as part of the community in which it is being built. So there needs to be policies and strategies put in place so that there's enough space for those that can go abroad, but also space for those that can stay within the national leagues or even lower categories. There's a good example also in Senegal with the Academy of Diembars that was set just, I think, over 10 years ago, and I think managed to win a championship in Senegal while selling excellent players to Greece, to Belgium, to France, but at the same time, they were able to maintain a proper squad to be competitive at the national level. So they managed to do both. And I think one of the issues maybe that we are missing in Africa compared to other, whether CONCACAF or Brazil for that matter, is that we need to keep basing our decisions on data-driven material. And we are lacking data big time on the African continent. We have data about names of some players and their age, but we need to develop more about their playing ability, their strengths, their weaknesses, and have really a kind of huge database that allows also a proper valuation of such a player, not just as a commodity, of course, they're all human beings, but it's important that there's a proper configuration of a database there. And that is not only valid for players, it's also the case for how a club can properly engage their own fans into making the product financially sustainable.
Steve, would you mind if I contributed very briefly
on
this point? Because I think that's really important. First of all, on the data side of things, which is Hicham has just mentioned there, and we have been working over the past 2 years to develop a CONCACAF benchmarking report, which looks at data points across our confederation and have a balanced scorecard for each member association, so we can really use data to inform some of the programming and some of the projects that they will be embarking on, and how we can supplement some of that work. So I think that's absolutely important from a member association standpoint. I'd like to also mention about the academy point and support the thought that, you know, all of the stakeholders together can make a better product, that all of the stakeholders with their different interests, actually, is there a way to really thrash out how everybody can have some sort of impact on the system? As we discussed earlier with the likes of the City Group, etc., Right to Dream, they are there and they are developing talent. How can we better bring them into the family to ensure that some of the norms and the important element of our ensuring that each player is treated fairly and equitably is absolutely central to everything that everybody does within the system. One thing we probably missed here today is the women's football element as well. And I think that's vitally important. And it's clear our U15 tournament, which I mentioned earlier, is for both boys and girls, because I think there is such an opportunity in the women's game to really develop the sport and to create so many opportunities for these young athletes. And we're having a really detailed look at our national competitions and our club competitions. When you look at from our region, where we have the likes of USA, Canada, and of course Mexico really improving, and we have all of our regions in Central America and the Caribbean, that opportunity is there, which needs the same sort of focus as what we've been discussing on the men's game.
Thanks, Jason. Gentlemen, we've just entered into our last 5 minutes. So I think just to give you each a minute just to recap or fill in anything that you might have wanted to say that we haven't got round to. Ricardo?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So my final points, first, given the current settings of Brazilian economy and Brazilian currency is still highly devaluated. So even if Brazilian clubs do their homework, given the current scenario, any proposal coming from abroad will still represent a fortune, a real temptation for these clubs. So of course, we hope that this will change in the future, but sometimes it doesn't depend exclusively on the clubs or on the football community, the football market. And that was, when I was talking about Flamengo's model, you know, I also, I didn't mention the example of Grêmio. So Grêmio is also a huge, a top Brazilian club, and which also started a restructuring process a few years ago, but they are working differently from Flamengo. So whenever there is a young talent in the team, they are trying to maintain this talent, playing for the first team in the Brazilian League, in Copa Libertadores, and so on, so they can have a technical return of this player. And we have seen this, for instance, in Cebolinha, there is now another player, Pepe, and with the conditions and the structure that's available for the youth team to develop the players, I think it's a matter of time. There will come a moment in which instead of having only one or two very talented players, some of these clubs, maybe Grêmio, will come up with a generation of young talents, and maybe this will change the game, change the landscape of Brazilian clubs' competitiveness abroad.
Thank you, Ricardo. Hicham, we're running out of time. A quick wrap.
I will do a quick wrap. It's difficult to do a wrap, but talking specifically about the topic, I hope that there are more and more partnerships across Africa and Europe, but also other confederation, as long as African clubs as well have access to know-how and processes and gain on top of the revenues certain insights about how to run better academies or protect their players. And I think one of the issues, of course, we can talk about today that would be, I think, a serious topic as well, is how to do something with the international match calendar that I see personally as something unfair to certain nations that are far from Europe because of the traveling times and so on, and have a better control in general of the regulations when it comes to match agents, and rights about the contractual requirements for players. And I think that all in all, we are still not doing enough for the players to be protected so that they can play in the best possible conditions.
Thank you. And then Jason, with a minute left.
I will be very, very brief. I think first and foremost, the wider context of this is the duty of care to the player, to the individuals that we're talking about. That is first and foremost. I think after that, we have to accept this a global game. And I think we also have to accept that not everybody in the system has to be doing the same thing at the same time, and that there's room for professional football to grow nationally and confederation-wide, as well as ensuring that the best talent get access to the best, most lucrative markets for them. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, gentlemen. I've got awkward 28 seconds left to fill before I hand back to the studio. Just to say that thanks very much for your time. I appreciate all your insights. I'm sure the global audience did too. And I've just about used up all the seconds and can now finally say I'm handing back to the studio. Thanks very much, guys. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.